Well, Shabbat Shalom, everybody. This is student Rabbi Shmuel ben Yehoshua, otherwise known as Rashbi, Rabbi Shmuel ben Yehoshua. That is the name maybe I shall go by when I become ordained. Anyway, one of my friends, Sherry, suggested that I do a little weekly D'var Torah. Now, what is the D'var Torah? Well, in Judaism, we've got the Torah, the 5 books of Moses. And it's a big scroll, and it's divided up into about 50 to 54 portions, depending on whether it's a 12-month or a year or a 13-month year. We add an extra month every few years to make sure that holidays like Passover come out in the spring when they're supposed to, and Sukkot comes out in the fall, because it's a harvest holiday, so make sure that happens. Anyway, every week we read a different section of the Torah as we advance through the Torah, starting in September, the holiday of Simchat Torah, literally meaning happy Torah, happy 5 books of Moses, happy learning. And we start with, of course, the talking about the creation, Adam and Eve, Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and we proceed through the Torah. Now, the Torah is not necessarily a history book per se, rather it traces the evolution of the early development of the religion we now call Judaism, talks about how that developed and the different people who are instrumental in bringing God's word to the masses, so to speak. So this week we are in the portion that is called Vayeishev, and typically portions are named for one of the words that appears at the beginning of that portion. There is no punctuation or grammatical marks in the Torah, so the way they know where they're at is by recognizing a word or two that starts a specific portion. So here in Vayeishev, what do we have? We have Jacob is now a mature man. He has moved his family to his own land. His family now consists of 12 sons and 1 daughter. Some rabbis seem to think that whenever a son was born, there was a daughter born with that particular son. So, of course, the first wife to give birth was Leah. That was his first wife. And now Rachel, who is his favorite wife, has given birth to Joseph, and 9 years later she gave birth to Benjamin, her second son. Benjamin meaning son of Onani, which is my mourning, because she died as Benjamin, the last son, was being born. However, again, Jacob had 2 wives, Leah and Rachel. They also, each one of them, had handmaidens, Bilhah and Zilpah. Each one of them had a couple of sons. Leah, being the first wife, had 6 of the 12 sons, the oldest being Reuben, then Simeon, Levi, and Judah. Those were the 4 eldest sons. Joseph, however, being the son of Jacob's wife, Rachel, is Jacob's favorite son. Now, of course, after this, it becomes imperative that people only have 1 wife, because, of course, there's jealousy among wives. Even more important than that, and even more tragic than that, you have jealousy between some of the sons. So Joseph, being Jacob's son, Joseph now is described as youth. The Hebrew word is na'ar, for youth, but it also implies a certain immaturity, a certain callousness, being kind of a kid. Kind of a little bit of a snotty kid anyway, because he was being spoiled. So Jacob tells Jacob tells Joseph, yes, to go out into the fields and check on his sons, make sure they're doing their job of minding the sheep out there, because Jacob had amassed such a vast cadre of cattle out there. And of course, Joseph comes out there, and the other brothers, the older brothers, represented this or resented this snotty little kid who is there to check up on them. When he comes out there, Joseph tells the brothers that he's had a couple of dreams about them. The first dream is that he's holding a sheaf of wheat, and his sheaf is standing up straight, and their sheaves are, of course, bowing down to them. To his sheaf, the implication is that they are going to bow down to them. Now, that didn't set well with them at first. But then he comes back, and when he comes back again, Jacob had given him the infamous coat of many colors. Now, this was a beautiful coat. It was meant to honor Joseph. But back then, tribal chieftains had similar coats of many colors, and this kind of was their rank. This was their insignia. This showed that they were the chief. So, of course, the brothers resented him even more. And they started plotting to do away with him. So they take him and they kidnap him, they throw him in a pit, and they take the coat and they rip it up, douse it in goat's blood, so that they could show Jacob that, hey, unfortunately, your favorite son Joseph was killed on the way by some beasts. That because if they say that he's gone, then of course Jacob won't rest, or he won't let them rest until they find him, right? So they put him in a pit, and while they're deciding what to do with him, there's actually two stories. One is that he's handed off to a caravan of traders on their way to Egypt, who is then handed off to another caravan, and Joseph gets lost. Another story says that while Joseph is in the pit, a caravan of, I believe, Midianites are passing by. They see him in the pit, and they kidnap him and take him away, and the brothers lose track of him that way. Either way, they lose track of him. Now, some of the brothers, mostly Simeon and Levi, wanted to actually just kill Joseph right away. Reuben, the oldest son, the oldest of Leah's son, who was in fact the oldest, intervenes and says, no, we can't do that. And Judah says the same thing. Judah backs up Reuben, and because of them, his life is spared. And now Joseph is on his way to Egypt and into slavery. In the meantime, this particular portion digresses to a story about Judah. Judah, of course, was the fourth oldest. He didn't like being one of the masses, so he finds one of the local people that he felt was kind of moral, enters into a business arrangement with him, and basically starts his own business. In the meantime, Judah also meets a woman. They have ultimately 3 sons. His oldest son finds a woman by the name of Tamar, who he marries, but then he dies. Now, back then they had this process called the levy rate. That's what it was in Latin. In Hebrew, the word is yibum. But when a man and woman are married, the husband dies, and it's up to the next oldest brother to then marry the woman and give birth to a son who will then carry on the name of the family. But there's some implications in Kabbalah that newborn son is actually the reincarnation of the dead husband. So the next oldest son is Onan, and we remember that name from the 60s and 70s. There are some implications. Onan refuses to impregnate Tamar, and he, of course, is killed as well. The implication, the Mishnah, which is like the folklore, discusses how these 2 sons were killed by God for their punishment to not be fruitful and multiply, and they didn't want to impregnate Tamar because she was too beautiful to become pregnant and ruin her body. Isn't it funny that here we are 3,500 years later and some celebrity women seem to think the same thing, so they go off and adopt. Well, it was going to fall to the youngest son, Shelah, who was at this point still just a child of about 10 or 11. Judah, however, was concerned. He sees that 2 sons died, being involved with Tamar. He doesn't want to risk the third, so he says, no, we're not going to do that. Tamar, however, was a righteous woman. She felt that she needed to be impregnated. She needed to have the son. There's some also implications. There's some Mishnah, once again, the folklore that goes along with these stories, because she knew that her child would ultimately be the ancestor or the predecessor of King David. So what she does is she goes off and she tricks Judah. She disguises herself as a harlot, which back then was sort of acceptable. Judah sleeps with her not knowing who she is, and she says, how will you pay me? He says, well, I'll give you some cattle. I don't have it with me. I don't carry cattle on me, but here is my signet, my wrap, and my ring, I believe, or my staff, my scepter. You hold on to these, and these will be collateral until I go get the money to pay for you. So meanwhile, she takes off. He comes back, and she's nowhere to be found. 3 months later, there's Tamar with becoming pregnant with a little baby bump. And some of the townspeople where Judah is at now come to Judah. He is still a prince, a tribal chieftain. And they say to him that, hey, your daughter-in-law is pregnant by harlotry. Okay? Now, the penalty back then, of course, was death. So Judah approaches Tamar, and Tamar says, Tamar brings out the scepter and the signet and the wrap of Judah and says, whoever these are, let him come forward and admit that they are the one that impregnated me. Now, the importance of this is a very important lesson, because Tamar could have ratted out Judah any time, but she chose not to. The implications is that in Judaism, not tale-bearing, not bearing false witness is extremely important. If you look at the commandments, at all the commandments, okay, it says, thou shalt not murder what? Twice. 2 times in the whole Torah it says, do not murder, okay? Do not bear tales, do not bear false witness. That's in there about 7, 8 times, and this is the first time. Tamar was ready to give her life rather than bear tales against Judah. It's that important. Judah sees it. He finally does the right thing. He admits to it, sees that, yes, she did the right thing in tricking him, because that way Tamar will have a child that will carry on Judah's name. So now we're back to Joseph, who has landed in Egypt and has found favor with one of the ministers, in fact, the viceroy, the second in command to the Pharaoh, and has achieved the place of prominence in his family, being taking care of his household, being kind of like the chief butler. Unfortunately, Potiphar, who is the viceroy here, who is the vizier, the chief minister, has a wife who has become enamored of Joseph, and of course Potiphar is off doing things, and often, many times his wife tries to seduce him. Joseph, especially being an 18-year-old kid, being in charge of the house, 18 or 19, he's growing his hair, he's making up his eyes, he's being kind of a little bit of a stud, and he keeps trying to push her away. At one point, everybody's gone from the house. His wife tries to grab him, and he gets away, but she's holding on to his coat, and of course, when everybody comes back, she twists it around, says that he tried to molest her, and of course, the penalty should have been death, but Potiphar knows his wife, has some pull in the Egyptian political system, doesn't want to seem like he's favoring him too much and being against his wife, so he does throw him in prison. And this was kind of a white-collar prison, where people get to walk around, but they are still in prison, but it's not like a dungeon of sorts. Meanwhile, seeing as how Potiphar is also the head of the prison, he has some weight there. Joseph finds favor with the warden and ends up being one of the, what do they call the people in prison, who get to do special things. There's a special name, I forget, but that's who he is. He gets the help. Joseph is there for 10 years. After 10 years, 2 people are thrown in prison, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. The chief baker had baked in a pebble into Pharaoh's bread, and the chief cupbearer was ready to serve wine with a dead fly in it. Now, the cupbearer is ultimately found innocent because, a fly, it's not dangerous, it's disgusting, but it's not dangerous. But as far as the baker goes, well, you could choke on a pebble. Meanwhile, they have dreams, and they say, is there nobody there to interpret dreams? Okay, Joseph can interpret dreams. They come to him, he offers to do it. He tells him that the dreams that they have show that the cupbearer is going to be absolved, the baker is going to lose his head, he's going to die, and it turns out they come true. Joseph tells the cupbearer, hey, when you go to Pharaoh, when you're released, remember me. And of course, the cupbearer does not, and that's where we leave off. So that's the story. I hope you enjoyed it. Hope this hasn't been too long. Maybe next time it'll be a little shorter. But thanks for listening. Shabbat Shalom to everybody, and you have a good weekend. And Merry Christmas to my Christian friends.